Most people think the hardest part of getting older is health problems. But after speaking with thousands of seniors over the years, I've learned that's rarely what breaks their heart. An 81-year-old woman named Eleanor sat across from me in my office and said something I have never forgotten. She said, "I still know how to do everything. I still have so much to give. But nobody is standing in line for any of it anymore." I'm going to come back to Eleanor, because what she said next, the complete thing, is the most honest thing any patient has ever told me. And by the time we get there, I think you'll understand exactly why it stopped me cold. But first, I need to tell you about the 4 struggles that come before it. Because Eleanor's words only make full sense once you've seen the whole picture. The doctor's appointments, the medications, the slower mornings, people adjust to those. They're concrete, manageable. You learn to work around them. What people cannot adjust to is something much quieter, much harder to name. The kind of ache that sits in the chest at 2 in the morning when the house is completely still and the phone hasn't rung, and you realize you can go an entire day without anyone at all, needing you for anything. I've had patients tell me this in the middle of appointments about something else entirely. Their voice would change and they'd say, "You know what's actually hard?" And what came next was never about their knees or their blood pressure. It was about feeling invisible, feeling forgotten, feeling like the world had quietly moved on and left them watching from a window. Today, I want to talk about 5 of those hidden struggles, the ones most people don't name because they don't want to seem ungrateful or weak, the ones that deserve to be spoken out loud, because being seen is a kind of medicine that nothing else can replace. If you're over 70, I want you to feel, by the end of this, that someone finally said the thing you've been carrying silently. Let's start with number 5. Number 5. Losing physical independence. I want to be honest about why this one makes the list, because it might seem obvious, and yet the reason it hurts isn't what most people expect. It's not the inconvenience. Seniors are some of the most adaptable, resilient people I've ever known. They adjust. They find workarounds. They manage. What hurts is the meaning attached to the loss. Think about what driving represented. It wasn't just transportation. It was freedom. It was the ability to decide on your own that today you'd go to the hardware store, or visit a friend, or simply take a long drive with the window down because the afternoon was beautiful. When that goes, when you have to ask someone to take you somewhere, when you have to plan around other people's schedules, when you catch yourself hesitating before you make a request because you don't want to be a bother, something shifts. A man I'll call Harold told me he stopped going to his Tuesday morning coffee group after his license was taken away. Not because he couldn't get a ride. His daughter offered every week, but he said, "It wasn't the same when I had to ask. I felt like a child being driven to school." He stopped going. He stopped calling the men from that group, and within a year, that connection, those friendships of 20 years, had quietly dissolved. Physical independence isn't just about what you can do. It's about who you still feel like you are. But as much as that struggle weighs on people, the next one tends to cut even deeper, because this one involves loss that cannot be worked around. Number 4. Watching friends disappear. I don't just mean losing friends to death, though that grief, accumulating year after year, is its own particular kind of weight that younger people simply cannot fully comprehend. I mean all the ways friends disappear, the ones who move away to be near their children, the ones whose minds begin to go, who are still there in body but no longer quite present in the conversations you used to love, the ones who fall ill and become unreachable, the ones who simply drift because life at 75 doesn't have the same natural gathering places that life at 45 did. No office, no school events, no neighborhood full of young families. One by one, the people who knew your whole story start to go. A woman I'll call Margaret lost her husband at 76. Within 2 years, she told me, she had also lost most of their shared friends, because friendships, she realized, had been built as couples. The invitations stopped coming, not out of cruelty. People simply didn't know how to include a single person in a world built for pairs. The dinner tables had even numbers. The travel plans were for couples. I became inconvenient to the life I used to have, she said. Not unloved, just inconvenient. I think about Margaret often when people talk about loneliness as a senior issue, because her loneliness didn't come from a lack of people. It came from a slow, quiet dissolution of the world that had held her. And yet, none of this compares to the next struggle. The one most families don't see coming, and many seniors are too proud to name. Number 3. Feeling left behind. The world changes fast. It always did. But there is something particular about watching it change from the outside, from a position where the changes were not designed with you in mind, and where asking for help navigating them requires an admission that the gap has grown wide enough to need bridging. New phones with new systems every 2 years. Websites that change their layout without warning. Medical portals that require you to book appointments online through interfaces designed by 25-year-olds who have never once thought about what it feels like to try to learn something new when everything familiar has already changed 10 times over. But it isn't really about technology. That's just the most visible symbol of something larger. It's the feeling that the world is being built for people who aren't you. That the conversations around you are about things you don't recognize. That your references, your music, your humor, your way of doing things, all of it has been quietly reclassified as old-fashioned. That being thorough, deliberate, and experienced is no longer as valued as being fast, digital, and young. A woman named Ruth, 82 years old, a retired school teacher who had spent 40 years shaping young minds, told me that the hardest moment of recent years was when her grandson, trying to help her with her phone, said with frustration, "Grandma, this isn't complicated." She didn't say anything. She just nodded and let him finish. But she told me later, "I have a master's degree. I ran a classroom of 30 children for 4 decades. And in that moment, I felt completely stupid." That feeling, the feeling of being diminished by the pace of a world that didn't slow down to include you, is something millions of seniors carry silently. They don't mention it because they don't want to seem like they're complaining. And because somewhere, quietly, they have started to believe it. But as painful as that is, it still isn't the hardest part. The next struggle is the one that very few people say out loud. And yet, when I've brought it up with patients over 70, the response is almost always the same. A long pause. And then, yes, that's it. That's exactly it. Number 2, feeling invisible. Not ignored. Not disrespected. Something more subtle, and in some ways more painful than either of those things. Invisible. The experience of walking into a room and having the energy simply pass through you. Of speaking and having the words not quite land with the weight they once carried. Of watching people's eyes move past you in the way they move past furniture. Not unkindly, just unremarkably. Of being present, physically, and somehow simultaneously absent from the attention of the room. It happens in restaurants, where the server addresses the younger person in the group. It happens in family gatherings, where the conversation moves quickly around topics that assume a familiarity with a world you've partially left. It happens in doctor's offices, where sometimes the physician speaks to the adult child who accompanied you as if you were not the one sitting in the chair. I've spoken with people in their late 70s and 80s who told me they had stopped sharing opinions at family dinners, not because they had no opinions, but because the response they'd come to expect was a kind of polite tolerance that felt somehow worse than disagreement. A smile and a nod and a pivot to something else. The conversational equivalent of a pat on the head. A retired judge named Franklin told me he went to his granddaughter's college graduation dinner and sat at the end of the table for 3 hours. surrounded by family, part of a celebration. And he said, not one person asked me anything about my life. Not one person seemed to remember that I had one. He wasn't bitter about it. That's what struck me. He understood that the younger people at the table were absorbed in their own beginning, their careers, their futures, their excitement. He understood that. He just said, very quietly, I used to be interesting to people. I don't know when that changed. I did not have a good answer for Franklin that day. But I've thought about what he said many times since. And it leads directly to number one, the struggle Eleanor described. The one I promised you at the beginning. We're almost there. But there is one more before it, and this one is the one most families cause without ever realizing they're doing it. Number two. Number one. No longer feeling needed. This is the one that breaks people quietly, over time, in a way that is almost impossible to articulate to someone who hasn't felt it. Think about what it meant for most of your adult life to be needed. Your children needed you for everything: food, comfort, wisdom, presence, a soft place to land when the world was hard. Your employer needed you, your knowledge, your reliability, your history, your judgment. Your friends needed you, your advice, your steadiness, your particular way of seeing things. Your spouse needed you in ways too fundamental to list. Being needed was not just a role. It was an identity. It was the organizing principle of most days. It gave mornings a reason and evenings a meaning. And then, gradually, it shifts. The children become capable and busy. The grandchildren have parents to turn to first. The workplace no longer requires your presence. The friends need you less or are no longer there. And if the spouse is gone, if the person who needed you most in the world, in the most daily and intimate way, is no longer there, the silence left behind is not just emotional. It is structural. The entire architecture of a life built around being necessary to someone suddenly has nothing to hold it up. A woman named Eleanor was 81 when she told me the most honest thing I've ever heard a patient say. She said, I still know how to do everything. I can still cook. I can still listen. I can still give advice that's worth giving. I have 81 years of life in me. But nobody is standing in line for any of it anymore. And sometimes I wonder what it was all for, if there's no one left who needs what I have. She didn't say it with self-pity. That's what I want you to understand. She said it the way you state a fact that simply needs to be said. Calmly. Clearly. The way someone speaks when they've been holding something for a long time and finally found someone worth saying it to. I sat with her in silence for a moment, because there was nothing small enough to say in response to something that true. Eleanor was not depressed. She was not frail. She was one of the sharpest, most present people I had seen all week. She had raised 4 children, buried a husband, survived things I couldn't name. She had been needed, profoundly and consistently, for more than 5 decades of her life. And now she sat in a quiet house, with all of that still inside her, and no door to put it through. If you are over 70 and you have felt this, even once, even privately, even in a moment you pushed away quickly, I want you to know, Eleanor felt it too. And she was one of the strongest people I have ever known. This is not weakness. This is one of the most honest and human responses to one of the most profound transitions a person can experience. It deserves to be treated that way. So here is what I actually believe after years of these conversations. The world does not stop needing what you have. It simply stops asking loudly. The grandchild who rolls their eyes at your story will tell that story to their own children one day. The wisdom you've accumulated through loss and failure and survival and grace does not expire when the world stops requesting it. The steadiness you carry, the ability to sit with difficulty without flinching, which only comes from having done exactly that many times, is one of the rarest and most valuable things that exists. The world is full of people moving very fast. And moving very fast, it turns out, is not the same as moving wisely. What seniors often carry: patience, perspective, the understanding that most crises are smaller than they feel, that most of what people call urgent is not urgent at all, that love is specific and time is finite, and neither should be wasted. These are not old-fashioned ideas. They're truths that every generation has to learn the hard way. You learned them, and that matters. If you're over 70 and you recognized yourself in any of what I shared today, I want you to know something. What you've been feeling is real. It is not weakness. It is not ingratitude. It is not something to be ashamed of, or minimized, or pushed down with a reminder that other people have it worse. What you've been carrying is the weight of a life fully lived, and the very human grief of watching the shape of that life change in ways you didn't choose and couldn't stop. You are allowed to feel that, and you are allowed to say so to your family, to your doctor, to your pastor or priest, or whoever holds that kind of conversation for you. Not as a complaint, as a truth that deserves to be spoken. Because here is the thing about invisible people. They become visible the moment someone decides to look. I'd like to think this video was a small moment of looking. You are not invisible to me. And if nobody has said that to you recently, in exactly those words, without qualification, without immediately moving on to something else, then let me say it again. You are not invisible to me. Tell me in the comments, what do you think is the hardest part of getting older? Is it one of the 5 I named? Is it something else entirely? If you're over 70, I would genuinely love to hear your experience. Your words matter here. And more than that, they may be exactly what someone else watching this needed to read today. If this felt true to you, please share it. With a family member. With a friend who's been quieter than usual lately. With someone who might need to feel, just for a few minutes, that someone is paying attention. There's another video here about ways to rebuild connection and purpose after 70. Practical, honest, and built around what actually works. It follows directly from everything we talked about today. Growing older does not make you less important. Sometimes it simply means the world needs to be reminded of your value. And some reminders, the right ones, said clearly enough, change everything.